Welcome everyone to this Africa Harm Reduction Alliance coffee chat today. My name is Ilna Vayesh. I'm a THR advocate and moderator for today's video. And I'm here on behalf of AHRA. If you're new here, we are an Africa-centric harm reduction advocacy group. Our mission is to reduce drug, alcohol, and tobacco-related death and disease in Africa by educating policymakers as well as consumers on the benefits of harm reduction policies. You can visit ahra.info to learn more about us. And just a quick note that all the links and resources will be available down in the description of this video. Okay, so today we're sitting down with Kurt Yeo. He is the co-founder of the consumer advocacy group, Vaping Saved My Life, South Africa. It's great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ilna, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So vaping advocacy, it's not really a career that you say you want to do when you're like standing on stage. You know, I want to be a harm reduction specialist or advocate. So how did that happen?
No, it certainly isn't. It was all pretty much by accident, really. I was a long-term smoker for 20 years and was desperate in trying to quit and was relatively unsuccessful. And I decided to try a rather new technology or device called an e-cigarette many years ago. And it initially didn't work on what we called the twist device. And I tried to use the twist device for a couple of months, and that wasn't working. It definitely reduced my smoking rate. I was probably smoking around 40 a day at that stage. Oh. And it was just a chance meeting of somebody that was selling another type of e-cigarette, which is now commonly known as a vape, from the boot of his car in our business parking lot. And I said, well, let me just try this. Let me take one, you know. So I bought one, and within 3 days, I had quit smoking altogether. And I don't believe a lot of people, especially non-smokers out there, understand how significant that is, where you have been so desperate to quit that you either basically resign yourself to the fact that you're not going to quit and you're just going to continue, or you do some strange, odd things. So it was a very big thing that I quit. And I then started doing a bit more research and so forth and around that. And then I left my job in corporate to start a vape business, a vape shop. And in that process, I met a lot of people that had very similar stories to me and very similar aha moments, you know, life-changing event of moving from smoking to vaping. It was such a big thing. I just kept promoting it. And then being in the vape industry, I started picking up a lot of friends and colleagues in the industry. And in 2017, and this was around about the time that we saw popcorn lung taking hold of the news waves, a good friend of mine that we basically became friends through vaping, he runs a rather successful vape business in KwaZulu-Natal. We sat together and said, we need to do something about this because it's now taking away the benefits or taking away some of the information around vaping and making it sound like it's a dangerous thing. So we came up with an idea to start a Facebook page called Vaping Saved My Life, where we invited other vapers around South Africa to share their testimonials as to why they believe this product was so beneficial to them in their lives. And that's where it started, and it started in June 2017. And since then, it's obviously progressed to something a bit more structured and a bit more involved.
Oh, wow. So it's actually, people talk about 2017 like it's last year, but it's actually quite a while in terms of, you know, harm reduction advocacy. I was reading on your website, which the link will also be down in the description below, Your recent open letter, there was a blog post on Vaping Saved My Life where you describe yourself as a victim of the suffering left in the wake of smoking. So based on what you experienced in terms of your journey from smoking to quitting and the availability of that, can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on, you describing yourself as a victim and the promotion of THR via ends?
Well, 20 years ago, my father passed away from a heart attack, which was smoking related. He smoked his entire life, and he died the day before my planned wedding. So instead of actually having a wedding, we had a funeral. And then 17 years thereafter, my mom, through many years of suffering from smoking, started developing small strokes, and it started slowly but surely chipping away at her ability to function in life. And she passed away on our wedding anniversary. And I had to bury my mom on my birthday. And so then, that had a massive impact. One of the biggest failures in my life was not being able to convince my mom to stop smoking and try vaping. I don't believe it would have, prolonged her life, because she had smoked for such a long time and she was such a heavy smoker. But I still consider it as a big failure. And every morning when I wake up, and I've now got a 13-year-old son, it really does tug on me that he had never met his grandfather, and he had the only memory of his grandmother is not anything what she really was. And when you have these discussions with other similar smokers that have seen this loss, my story isn't that unique. Yes, it's rather alarming that unfortunately passed on big life events that I was living through, but that pain and suffering is still there. And we've got a lot of kids, a lot of people out there that didn't grow up with their grandparents, or in their 20s like I was then burdened with looking after or concerned about their mom or their parent. So I've lost a lot of members in my family because we came from a smoking family due to smoking, but we're not unique. And there's a lot of this pain and suffering that's happening around there. And that's what drives me every day, is not the fact that I not only want to protect vaping for people that are currently using it, but also provide it or have it available to all the people that need it and could benefit from it. So that's pretty much the driving force and where the pain is coming from. And I think a lot of the times, and I firmly believe this, is that smokers are deemed as second-class citizens.
Yeah.
They're ostracized, they're stigmatized, they're taxed up the wazoo. And they don't, in some cases, even in our country, South Africa, there's even medical assistance is declined based on their smoking status. But we don't have any services or products that are made available to these people in the same way as you would see, for example, HIV and AIDS or high blood pressure or any of the other things that we see in the public health sphere. They literally are shunned and kept away. And I find that a massive human rights issue.
No, for sure. And I think, vaping is taking on the same format. People who vape are seen as second-class citizens, as you said. And I don't think that's fair at all, because it actually hinders the opportunity that you could be giving those people to make a life-changing choice, In all of this, I obviously see like how passionate you are about all of this, and you're so passionate that you wrote an open letter to one Dr. Catherine on the South African Medical Research Council, and she's working as a public health scientist and specialist in tobacco control at the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drug Research Unit. What prompted you to write that? Obviously, all of this, like in a nutshell, together with so much other things happening, like the lack of research, the lack of data that's available. But Can you tell me a bit about that? Because it's very detailed and I love reading it, just by the way.
Thank you. It's based not in isolation. I've tried to reach out many times to the South African Medical Research Council in specifically getting data around the recent Global Adult Tobacco Survey. And it's based around that particular group is managed under a South African Act. And in that Act, it really quite clearly stipulates that if I request information that they have or contain, should be provided to me. And like we've seen around the world and we experience it in South Africa, is they shut the door on people that are aligned with tobacco harm reduction. They kind of, once again, stigmatize us, ostracize us, put us in a block and label us as being tobacco company shawls. And all that I kind of requested is that, can I have access to not only the full report, but the data set? And also, when they were presenting this particular data to I don't know who, because they've never responded, but asked if I could literally be part or have a copy of that recording of that video, because she refused to have me attend or allow me to attend this presentation. And it was a virtual presentation. So I, in pure frustration, wanted to write to Dr. Catherine and address some of the things that I felt were not being presented correctly. And there's a lot of information that is not being put forward. And as a South African citizen, I'd like to hold the South African Medical Research Council at a much higher standard, because their role and function in public health and being able to research all the things that affect public health. And therefore, I do hold them in a much higher regard. And I expect that group to look at all the available data and present all available data in such a way that people then could make their own decisions and not literally be so biased, in my view, to one side of the argument without presenting the other side. And there was a number of elements inside there where I wanted to find out why they're not providing that overview, or at least a complete analysis of it, and why some of the things that they are intentionally keeping away from this discourse. And that's where it stemmed from, is that frustration of not being able to access and have discussions with these people or with anybody out there as to what do they know that, for example, Public Health England doesn't know? What do they know that, for example, New Zealand Health Ministry doesn't know? What do they know that, for example, the Royal College of Physicians doesn't know? And more importantly, what do they know that the Cochrane's Systematic Review doesn't know? All of these institutions are the gold standard in our medical research and medical understanding. You know, these are not Mickey Mouse groups. These are large, well-established, well-respected groups that have provided insight into their take and what they believe is what tobacco harm reduction and e-cigarettes or vaping in the public health sphere is. Why we have such a contrast, why does the South African Medical Research Council have such a contrasting view to these other groups? What do they know? And we've never, or I've never received anything back from them, which is very disappointing.
How long, just out of interest, like how long have you been writing to them?
It started with a letter that was pretty much a couple of days after the initial release of the fact sheet, where I had asked them, when can we have access to this data set so that we can establish, why they indicated that 2.2% of the population uses these products. I'm interested to know, who are these people in the population?
Yeah, where's this information from?
What's their demographic, and then I needed to understand is, do they have a smoking history or don't they have a smoking history? What is the frequency? So I wanted to understand to what level or what depth did this particular research go? Is it just a straightforward, do you know e-cigarettes? Yes. Have you used e-cigarettes? Yes. Do you still use e-cigarettes? Yes. And to me, that is just scratching the surface on what needs to be known in the South African context. And unfortunately, we don't get that. So that's been a few months now that they haven't responded.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, in terms of the data, a lot of it is said that it comes and where the prohibition walkway is going to is a lot of the data comes from being scared that youth are the ones that are being the top percent of vapors in the country, you know, and the lack of accurate research and data available on youth is one thing, but then on the other side of the coin, you have, how do you approach that ethic? You can't go up to teenagers and go, hey, do you vape? Are you willing to tell us which flavor is your favorite or what you like most about it? It's very difficult to approach that in a way that, you know, you can submit that data and say, this is accurate information. And as accurate as it may be, it won't even be looked at because of the efficacy behind it. So if you can maybe elaborate a bit more on youth vaping, because it was a big point as well in your open letter that you wrote, and just your thoughts around that whole subject.
You know, before I became an activist, I was a father, and I'm still a father. And I have many times had these discussions with my 13-year-old son around risky behaviors, including smoking, including vaping, why it's a bad idea, so forth and so on. And I do strongly believe that we should try as much as we can to eliminate youth vaping, youth smoking, and any of the other risky behaviors that is relating to the youth. Just recently, Professor von Zyl-Smit released a pilot study highlighting the amount of vaping in high-income schools. And I don't have a problem with that kind of research, but the way it's presented and the way it's interpreted is quite harmful, because it's used, in my way, as another blunt instrument to push this proposed bill that's sitting in South Africa, as well as the excise, which will in turn damage the potential of these products on the 11.1 million smokers in the country. So you basically...
That's not even worldwide, it's just South Africa.
No, that's just in the country. So we got 11.1, that's almost 30% of our population are smokers. And we're using a very small, very select, concentrated study to determine, or used it as a method to try and push this bill through based purely on fear and sentiment. But in that whole argument that we're talking about youth vaping, and once again, I agree that there should be methods used or approaches used to prevent youth uptake. I really do. You know, I'm one of those people that smoked, and we all started, pretty much most smokers started in their youth. And we failed to address that, because if we look at the Global Adult Tobacco Survey, 23.9% of young people are smokers. So we failed with the regulation that currently exists, because that's based on 2008 amendment, is that we prevent the sale of tobacco to under 18s. So we've failed in that. So regulation isn't the only thing. So going back to, you know, what the finding from Professor von Zyl-Smit's pilot study is that small, very concentrated cohort he used, how does that compare to the 23.9% of young smokers? How does that compare to the increase of youth pregnancy since 2019 by 60%? How does that compare to alcohol abuse in the same cohort? How does it compare to drug abuse in the same cohort? You know, we need to put some kind of perspective here. And I'm not saying that we should just say ignore it. We should need to understand that there's a far bigger picture happening here with our youth. And why is it happening? And I think Professor von Zyl-Smit touched on it, is that the majority of the people they surveyed in that small cohort, or very, very precise cohort, indicated anxiety as one of the reasons why they started using these products. Now, that's very easy to understand given the fact that we've just come through a pandemic. A lot of these kids in those age groups were locked away at home, so they pretty much were disrupted. Their schooling was disrupted. We also know, for example, that there's this fear based on the unemployment rate in the country. What are these kids are going to do when they leave school? Are they going to be able to go study further? Are they going to be able to get a job? So there's a lot of anxiety around that, and that's now trickling through all of these things. So I think from an ethical point of view, we need to look at measures that not only regulate to a certain point, but there needs to be education, there needs to be monitoring, and there needs to be enforcement. And South Africa has failed on the enforcement, the monitoring aspect for the longest time. If we understand, for example, the illicit trade of cigarettes in South Africa, the illicit cigarettes in South Africa is the majority of the market, anywhere between 50 and 70%. If you, depending on which study you're referring to, whether it's the Ipsos study or whether it's the REAP study, but 50 to 70% of cigarettes consumed in South Africa are illicit. So we're failing to monitor, we're failing to enforce, and we're failing to educate. And we seem to think that just putting in regulations is going to solve the problem. It's never going to solve the problem if we don't have those other elements in there. And that's where I believe we should kind of just pause slightly, look at what we need to do or what the actual problem is, what is the real situation, and then start creating pragmatic solutions that can address this and include all stakeholders in this message. You know, it's very strange to me, like we see with the recent COP with the climate control and the climate change, is how they bring all stakeholders in to address the situation. What can be done to address the situation? But when we look at the World Health Organization's FCTC and the COP9 and now COP10 next year, is that we only want certain individuals to be participants in this. The rest of you, we don't want to know. So we shun you away. We don't want to hear from you. And those, majority of those are the victims of past failures and past misunderstandings. They don't want to hear about it. They have the solution, which has never worked, by the way. So, yeah, I think we are approaching this conversation in very much the same way as South Africa had approached HIV and AIDS in the late 90s and 2000s, is denial and literally walking away from the known science or the understood science.
Oh, for sure. And it also creates almost a sense of xenophobia against people who vape and smoke, and already
the stigmatization.
Yeah. So like that anxiety and that stress that they're experiencing just gets amplified because they are now put in a little box of shame because of something that helps them maybe to live a safer alternative lifestyle with the assistance of vaping, or they actually find some help. I mean, we did a recent webinar with Michelle Minton, where she spoke about the mental health benefits of nicotine and how it's such a criminally misunderstood chemical. And, you know, nobody wants to touch on that because nobody wants to talk about that and actually how it can assist us in solving the problem rather than just stigmatizing it, putting a big no stamp on it and just sending it down the line. So I think for sure.
It's a lost opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also where South Africa comes in play is, you also mentioned it in your letter, is how they grouped the surveys that they've in terms of for youth smoking. I mean, the grouping was between the ages of 15 and 24 years old. The legal smoking age in South Africa is 18. So why are we grouping people who are of legal age to smoke into a survey to talk about youth vaping and the dangers it poses to within schools and on our children? Unfortunately, now this has become a boom. And what do kids do when you forbid something? Obviously, they're going to go and do it more because now it's fun. Now it's a trend. So I think what you said is is very true. We need to just take a pause on how aggressively we're going after this and just take a step back and look at how we can approach this in a more constructive way.
Well, I mean, we've just lived through it in 2020, where there was this rather draconian preventing the sale of tobacco and vaping products, and all that it did is it strengthened and elevated the illicit trade. So you're forcing these people to now look of ways and means of being able to quit. And they know, you know, based on a lot of research out there, we know that a lot of these individuals want to quit. But the only option that they have at their disposal is quit or die. Cold turkey. And we know how unsuccessful that is, because in South Africa, although we have approved nicotine replacement therapies, although we have approved some of the medication out there, we never provide it in the public health sphere. It's not subsidized. We don't have cessation clinics except for one, which is the one in Kurt Yeo, which is headed by Professor van Zyl-Smit. We don't have counseling. Even our quit line is not even toll free. And the other interesting thing that I want to, you know, we don't get the data, for example, from the National Council Against Smoking, is how much is that service being used and how successful is that service used. So, and to me, in my eyes, if there's none of that, that means it's not really successful. And there's a lot of things we can touch about these different groups. But the reality is that when you pass these kind of regulations without consequential thought behind it, you're going to create a monster. And we've seen this now with the lockdown and the sale, is now we have an illicit trade that cannot be monitored, cannot be controlled, is providing products of maybe a substandard. And you know, it just becomes a far bigger problem to control, and it just pushes us further away from what the ultimate goal is. And the ultimate goal is always to reduce non-communicable diseases in the country, and the one of them being the biggest is smoking, or one of the biggest causes is being smoking. So touching on the youth again, a lot of people don't understand this, is that, or don't even know this, is that the last time we did a global youth tobacco survey in the country was in 2011. So once again, that goes back to monitoring, is that we're not monitoring this. And that brings into question why we did the global adult tobacco survey. Was it actually about the care and about public health? Or was it just, again, another blunt instrument to make sure that the bill gets passed? Because in my view, if it was about care, if it was about trying to understand, if it was trying to quantify, we would see this global adult tobacco survey being done at least every 2 years.
Yeah.
And then build measures and methods in ways to try reduce that. But effectively what we got now is we've got this incredibly draconian bill that's sitting in Parliament at the moment. And that, in my view, what I'm seeing is they're trying to use research to try and push it through and create those shock values. Because the GATS is a shock value. The numbers are alarming. And now the recent Professor van Zyl-Smit pilot study, and you know, all credit to him, he's been very clear. This is pilot. It's not representative. We cannot use this as a sample of the entire country. It's very, very biased, and that's to his credit. But we're seeing media and we're seeing these policymakers now going to use that particular figure to try and push this bill through without having any consultation with people,
experts, or people who are experts on using it.
Exactly.
No, for sure. So, okay, there's all this happening and it's politics, and we live in South Africa, so a lot of it happens. So as a consumer, you know, what can they do? How can they, what is their voice that they can use to actually help in the situation? I know that you have a petition on your website, and you have a couple of different movements, the #Want campaign that you're running as well. If you can quickly touch on that, then you know, how can a consumer do this? How can we help?
So you know, I always categorize things in urgent and important. So the urgent measure is the petition. So we're trying to get as many signatures on there. And if you are particularly a vapor, or you're somebody that believes that vaping could help the 11.1 billion smokers in the country, then please go onto our website. You'll see the petition section there. Sign the petition and share it amongst friends and family, because, you know, I'm the evidence, and we've got evidence. You know, many thousands of South Africans are the evidence that these products work. And we have 82 million other individuals around the world that prove that this product works. And then you have the important stuff. And the important stuff is stuff that we use and ongoingly will use. And one is the testimonials, which goes back to our June start date. And that's found on a website where we want to know about people that used to smoke and now vape, and they can provide a testimonial. And that just sits and gathers numbers, which is always going to be there. And then every year every year I've conducted a survey. So we got the 2022 Vapors survey. And there we look at a lot of in-depth questions, which we would like to see in, for example, research done at the South African Medical Research Council. Do you have a smoking history? Have you tried to quit? How long did you smoke? What kind of combustibles did you use? You know, why did you start vaping? How long have you vaped? What is your nicotine content when you started? What is the nicotine content now? And all of these very in-depth questions. And also part of that is their opinions on some of the things that are happening in our current discussion. What are their opinions? And that, I believe, is critical research that needs to be used. Or if they don't want to accept my data, do something like that, where we start looking at this from a very, very granular level, digging down quite deep to see what is the South African vapor. And that's also on the website. So I invite all South African vapors, please go on there, do the survey. It's critical to have that data, to present that data as being, this is the cohort of people that vape in the country.
Yeah, and your voice matters. Your experience matters, and your voice matters. So definitely check that out. Once again, all the links and resources will be listed below. Kurt, thank you for your time.
No,
one last question before you go. In the field of THR, who inspires you? Who would you recommend people to check out online? Apart from you, who's your inspiration?
There's so many out there in terms of policy, and in terms of a whole host of things. Clive Bates is the guy that nudged me into doing this full time. Sometimes I curse him, and sometimes I just thank him. Very insightful character, a lot of insight into big things. South Africa, Dr. Dylan Himon and Dr. Kosi Tlape are, you know, I have a lot of admiration and a lot of respect for those gentlemen. And then there's a whole host of consumer activists that I see them struggling in their own environments, in their own countries. And it's quite, you know, I hate to use the word heartening, but almost a camaraderie that they're experiencing the same things that I'm experiencing, having doors shut in your face, being labeled, you know, a tobacco straw, being ignored. But their tenacity and their drive to just, because they know deep down inside that if we get this right, how many lives we can impact. And it's not just the smokers' lives, it's their families, like my son's lives, that will be positively impacted if we can save those people from going down the route that my parent, and protect their kids, like from what I had to go through, and protect the grandkids, what my son has gone through. And I just, that they're inspirational, you know, and there's too many to mention. There are too many to mention.
I think a small voice, one small voice in a crowd is small, but if we all start to speak up, then we're going to make a really loud noise. And I think this is, especially what Vaping Saved My Life is moving towards. I've had a look at some of the testimonials and it's really been amazing. And just, continue to do the great work you do. It was definitely such an honor and such a privilege to sit down and chat with you. Thank you so much for your time. And all the recordings will be available on AHRA's YouTube platform, and Kurt's information will be linked down below. You can check out all their platforms. And Kurt, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, AHRA, and thank you, Ilna. It's been a great pleasure. And you guys keep up with what you're doing. You're doing great work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a